Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So, recently I was hearing the song that you're hearing in the background here, and it got me thinking, you know what, we've never actually covered the differences between dual wielding, off-wielding, and, double attacking. So I figured I'd go ahead and, I guess double striking would be the more accurate term. So I figured we'd go over the kind of different uses for these and the different situations when they apply in both Tactics Ogre Reborn as well as Tactics Ogre One Vision, since mechanically there's a little bit of overlap there. And I figured, you know what, whatever, we might as well cover it all while we're on the same topic. And they actually both use them both on and off for similar reasons, but I want to explain kind of what the benefits or downsides are in both of these cases. So to explain some terms, first of all, so dual wielding, even though it's officially called double attack in this particular instance, is going to be this right here. So this is going to be when you have the option to use two weapons in each of your hands. The classic Final Fantasy style dual wielding that essentially allows you to hit with two weapons at once. So positive of this, you get to attack twice if you're using basic attacks, and for a lot of the main story section of the game, this is going to be adequate enough to potentially get them kills that others might not be able to. However, the main benefit that continues in the long term is the fact that this potentially allows you to stack multiple different varieties of different debuffs on your weapons. Since, especially in Reborn, which is where we'll be starting here today, the debuff weapons have a tendency to last quite a bit longer, and so in this particular case, let's say you have Silence, you have Stun, and let's say you go and put Poison over here, which I don't think I have any Poison left over. Here, let's just put some Envenom over here, right? And so this means that potentially whenever he's going in attack, he has a decent chance to potentially guarantee up to two of those, potentially up to... Actually, no, I think he can potentially guarantee all three of them if he happens to get a Vigorous Attack splashed on him, in which case, yeah, that's three debuffs. Pretty good stuff. That's going to cause a decent bit of chaos. Downsides of this whole thing. So downsides are obviously that he doesn't have a shield. However, that's not really too much of an issue, seeing as shields aren't necessarily as effective as they are, let's say, in One Vision or something in Reborn. So it's up to you. If their defense is already pretty squishy, maybe they want a shield. In the case of a ninja, their weapons are lightweight enough for the most part, as well as their defense is relatively thin enough, with steel stance making up the bulk of their defensive situation, that this is just fine. The actual true benefit of using something like this on top of the debuff, though, is that it allows you to generate MP faster. And this is kind of the element that's usually missed, because two separate attacks mean that you're essentially going and doing your generation check twice there, which means that, yeah, you are potentially getting a decent bit up there. And especially if you happen to strike on a weakness, especially if you're combining with weapons that are also weak against the opposing unit, you potentially can generate a good bit of MP, potentially giving you a good little swing into, let's say, something like ninja summons or something, which, again, are a lot more useful during the story. You kind of want to upgrade to summon 2s by the time you get to the post-game. But still, this gives them some pivot potential. And additionally, if you happen to use a combination of weapons, like let's say both Dagar and 1HK, gives a good bit of stopping power as well as good bit of options here. While their basic attacks are relatively weak, this does give you your Heart Crusher, this does give you your Advent Sign, your Thunder Wave, as well as giving you two different double attackers as you would prefer to use them, giving you a stop move, giving you a sorry, a little bit of slow brain today. Giving a long range snipe over here, and then essentially a big overscaler here in the form of Overwhelm. So it's a good little moveset to have. Primarily, though, this falls into the category of what I would call off-wielding. So it's essentially when you're dual-wielding, but you're only attacking with one weapon at a time, but you do this primarily for finisher access. And so this would be stuff like, here, let's find somebody who's off-wielding, like right over here, where in essence, you're doing this to give you a lot of different elements. This gives you a lot of different elements that they can potentially strike on, because elemental bonuses off of finishers are really significant. They have a tendency to give you potentially very wide-reaching damage, good damage spikes, and debuffs that they otherwise might not be able to have on hand. Like Vile Wound is relatively cheap, and Poison is very, very powerful in this game, so, potentially that might be a good little tool to have on hand. But essentially, dual-wielding into off-wielding is a nice little combination. That's one of those things that ninjas are particularly good at, but this is something that Ranger and Lord are able to do as well. The downside, of course, is that they are still paying for the RT cost in these cases. The interesting thing about this, though, is, for example, Dagger plus something else is relatively cheap still, which is, again, weirdly accurate. Like, Tactics Ogre has this funny thing where oftentimes they actually do a pretty good job of representing the historical reality of a lot of these situations better than you'd expect. So, like, Dagger plus another weapon is usually going to be a pretty good combination because, yeah, Dagger makes a great offhand weapon. Good for defending, good for using in combination with something else, small and quick, so better for opportunity stuff. It's right there potentially for grapples and whatnot. So kind of neat how that ends up sort of folding in there. But yeah, this is not terribly punishing, but if you're, like, let's say going for, heavy sword and axe or something like that, yeah, that's going to get pretty expensive. Dual wielding in general has a tendency to hold up relatively well early on, but as you carry on, like, we're seeing already double recovery time on daggers by the time we get to the end. Let's say a Balder over here has 24, whereas the Fafnir has 35. Let's go over here. Let's go for a one-handed axe. Something like the Tabar Zin has 25 here. We go up to, let's get up to the Rune Axe, it's already up to 35. So either way, they go up pretty significantly as far as time cost goes. Now, that next gets me to the next thing, which is where does double attack fall into this particular equation? Because of double strike, I should say. So double strike is an odd one, in that it's essentially going to say, hey, you've got your weapon, whatever it may happen to be, you're going to go swing twice with it, or double impact, I should say. It's confusing. Between double strike, impact, attack, it has switched names a bunch of times between all the different versions. So, you know what, if you can keep track of them, by all means, go ahead and do so. But realistically speaking, yeah, it's kind of one of those things that's a bit of an annoyance to keep track of. Anyway, so, as far as double impact goes, it's a relatively cheap move, costing less than most finishers, and essentially allowing you to attack twice with your weapon. And if your character is physically pretty bulky, this potentially is going to be a pretty decent whack of damage, as it were, Now, again, finishers are always going to be the top of the pile as far as those finishers are concerned, and so ultimately, this is only a sort of situational thing. It's a little niche point between a regular attack and a finisher attack. It's not as powerful as a finisher attack, but due to, again, attacking twice, this means that it will also generate MP during that time. The downside, of course, is that unlike dual wielding, which is a passive, this is also going to take 40 MP in this case to activate, which means that while it can refund itself, it also has the downside, unfortunately, of also, well, I mean, it can refund itself, but also it needs a cost in the first place. So the other benefit is, of course, that this allows you to potentially dual wield, let's say, a one-handed weapon while also using a shield. So that's the other benefit of this. Like, let's say instead of going for crits or something, you wanted to just roll two separate chances to go drop a debuff on something. Like, let's say you have your classic Fall Strike Cutlass or something like that. And additionally, it's worth noting that in Reborn, you are able to stack these. So, for example, let's say you take your Fearful Impact, your Double Impact, and your Sanguine Assault, and on top of that, you're going to go throw on, what are we going to do here, like a Mighty Impact, right? You just go absolutely ridiculous mode with all of this type of stuff, and then sure, you're able to stack all this stuff up at the same time, and that's going to drop a whole lot of crazy numbers. But yeah, this is freakishly expensive, obviously, and takes 4 turns to actually activate, so it's up to you whether you'd really want to do something like this. But the main benefit is that, yeah, it's able to refund itself, but also it can be usable on any weapon, whether it's a two-hander looking to potentially build its way towards a finisher. Essentially, it allows you to also store some of your MP for later if you're maybe afraid of using it or having it leached or whatever else, which doesn't come up that often, but especially in One Vision, that is more of a concern. But it is relatively cheap. It is relatively stackable in this case. I would say double attack or double impact rather in this case is mostly useful for the purpose of not only generating additional MP but also for combining with other things. So by itself, I would say it's not really that worthwhile, but combining it with other things can be a decent bit of value. Now, from here, let's go ahead and move on to One Vision, because this is where the same elements actually get a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. Okay, and so in this case, we get up to the interesting case of One Vision, where we have the same mechanics, but again, they apply in different ways. So in this particular case, we're actually going to go ahead and start off with one that we didn't quite discuss, seeing as it's basically the Archer meta in many ways, the sort of Archer mega number meta, as it were, in the form of Double Shot. So The double mechanics in One Vision work a little differently in that they essentially are double the price, but also they don't cost any recovery time to activate anymore. So they actually do take some recovery time to activate in Reborn, and additionally, it's worth noting that as far as double shot is concerned, the reason that it matters a lot for archers in particular over in the Reborn side of things is because a large amount of their power comes from stacking bonus damage, and effectively this lets you double your bonus damage, and again combines with their tremendous shot, combines with slayer skills, combines with whatever the hell you want, and then you just breach fear and watch something get absolutely deleted out of the math universe. But when it comes to One Vision, this can be a bit of a different situation. So why would you care about double shots, double attacks, whatever else in this particular context? Generally speaking, defense is something that you want to focus on a decent bit more. However, you can work around a different type of defense situations in in a lot of creative ways. Like, for example, something like the Buccaneer obviously still has their evasion, which means that they can essentially stack that on top of a Phantom Cloak and a Seal of Alacrity to give themselves ungodly amounts of evasion to the point that they can just rely on either their evasion and evade stack to get rid of most damage coming their way, which frees up their defense to essentially allow them for dual wielding. And so primarily, once again in this case, you're mostly using this to get interesting effects out of your items. So in some cases, you might combine them to, let's say, give yourself a higher mind score for the purposes of scoring better debuffs. In this particular case, once again, daggers are extremely lightweight, so this means that they can just be used for an additional hit. And in his particular case, he is just looking to power level augment water as fast as possible. Whereas in other cases, this might be used for something else. Let's go ahead and find somebody else that's dual wielding at the moment to see what we're thinking in that particular regard. So, for example, somebody like Vice over here, he's going for more of a teleporting assassin-y kind of thing, and so his resistance is normally relatively poor. So he's going to pop on a Saurian here to give him some extra resistance, and on top of that, this allows him to claw into MP, making him good against various casters, and a binding dagger for the purpose of shutting something down. So hopefully, the idea here is he finds a cleric, he takes out their MP, he takes out their legs, and now they're dead in the water while he goes and moves on to another target, using his teleportation to pop in behind somebody and essentially use this to try and claw out as much numbers as he can before he moves on to the next target. It's a relatively effective setup and works decently well. Obviously, for a lot of different weapons, this can have different connotations, but then we also have other dual-wielding options, kind of like a alternate version of off-wielding over here, in the form of your alternate shields. Like, arguably a main gauche is a shield, but still replacing your offhand weapon with a weapon, for example, like the main gauche, which can have a shackle effect, can allow you to have a good shutdown effect. I consider this off-wielding to an extent because these are used as offensive tools just as much as regular weapons can. They just can't be dual-wielded in the traditional sense. So you've got your main gauche over here that would be useful. Let's say if something's about to have a turn, you have no other way to shut them down, you just roll for that 25% chance to break their arm. Something like your rams allow you to have a guaranteed stun, which also, prevents them potentially from taking their next turn. So there's a lot of options like that. Now, in other cases, off-wielding in One Vision can also be a little bit like this, where let's say I have a familiar over here that uses a short bow that has been using a short bow for a while, but they specifically keep a book on, well, whatever race they happen to be fighting at the time up in their primary slot in order to give them +3 to their relative racial skill, which allows them to vastly improve the power of this particular bow, and this also allows them to, at the same time, have access to deflection, which makes it particularly funny when they're going and using their high evasion or deflection to catch arrows with a book that they don't plan on reading, but they sure feel like reciting at people to an annoying degree. It is very amusing to me. Additionally, we can also take a look at stuff like the Flame and Void here, which primarily is just used as a stat booster. Not really too much to say there. However, in One Vision's case, going back to the double shot here, your double skills are primarily a way, just like in Reborn, for doubling down on bonus damage. They are particularly effective with certain weapon types. So like with, let's say, a heavy longbow, somebody like Olivia here might set up a double shot after taking a regular shot, not only to potentially preserve her TP, if, for example, there happen to be any casters that are deleting TP nearby, say there's any, ice casters or what have you. So like, let's say she sees that coming in, she doesn't exactly have much resistance against it, so she might turn on a double shot in order to have a bit of extra power after scoring some additional TP off of landing a critical, and now she's got a double shot available for later. However, a lot of her bonuses, again being an archer in this case, are coming from from her weapon, and so let's say she finds something that's weak to pierce, that's maybe weak to some ice or something, and she's got some good bonuses against it. This might be a very perfect way to set that up. However, she also, let's say, can put on something like the Mantis Earring to hopefully guarantee that she's not landing any crits on that particular unit. Essentially, putting on both Scouts and Mantises here for the purpose of hopefully landing at about -90, which gives her, functionally speaking, almost no chance to crit, which basically allows her to use that double shot there. It's a little bit more roundabout, but she doesn't have to worry about landing that critical on the first hit, which would ruin the secondary one. But this means that essentially she can use her saved up TP to have this additional double attack available, but at the same time, if she gets hit again, she maybe switches over to finishers, but she still has that double shot on hand for the purposes of either going and rebuilding her TP for later, potentially having a good counter if there's a archer that's potentially targeting her, or at the same time just having a means to kind of stack TP and then retreat. So one of the things that's pretty useful here is, let's say she takes a hit, she fires back, hopefully knocks the thing backwards, activates a double shot, and retreats. And so when she comes back, she potentially has the option to use either finisher or the double shot going forward for the next few turns, which is a weird way to describe that, but hopefully it helps to make sense to some degree. Now, I don't have a warrior on hand at this point because... Okay, so what about the next thing, double strike? So this is another one that, again, it's oftentimes hard to justify given the cost. However, it doesn't have a recovery time cost anymore, so this means that it has some really good setup potential, I would say. So double strike in this particular instance is primarily going to be used in cases, at least as far as I'm concerned, for, let's say, they either got a hit or took a decisive hit, and they are defensively in a good enough spot to set up a double attack to go potentially threaten anything with a double attack nearby. In a defensive sense, it has that sort of move right there. However, there's other weapons that it's really useful with. For example, like the Rocket Spear, if you end up landing this on a line of 4 units, that is potentially 8 criticals in a row, depending on how your setup goes. So that's a whole lot of power on this thing. If you manage to get a double attack with a good crit setup, that's potentially 4 units deleted in a single attack. So again, really potentially good stuff there. But it depends. In most cases, yes, finishers with their guaranteed finisher potential are really good. The thing is, finishers use up your entire bar at once, whereas something like your double attack will potentially give you a huge bit of power while also refunding, if not most, all of your, all of your TP there. Or rather, if not all, most of your TP, I should say. So, while it's not useful for every build every time, it can be used in that particular way. And then going back to dual wielding, obviously there's also going to be cases like this, where let's say anybody that can use daggers can also, let's say, use a Katetsu in their offhand, potentially adding a shutdown to their follow-up. So either a stun weapon or a sleep weapon in your offhand, if it's lightweight enough, can allow for dual wielding that essentially prevents counters a good bit of the time, so just also something to consider. You can't guarantee it, but there is a good chance that this will end up doing the job pretty well. So yeah, that's more or less about that. When it comes to dual wielding, it's a very versatile tool. Just know that not all dual wields are potentially made the same way. Sometimes you're using things for the purpose of setup for later. Sometimes you're just using it for plain offense, like in this case, where I just have a Berserker with 2 Vainasea's Talons for the purpose of not only power, but almost guaranteed poison, and also the ability to fly. So essentially they just sort of became a more armored Griffin in many ways. Whereas in other cases you might just use them for debuffs, in other cases you might use them for a more defensive setup, or to have a Hail Mary on chance to fix a turn that went wrong. So yeah, hopefully this was at least somewhat useful for you. Remember that the double strikes, or whatever your warrior version of the double or archer version of the double is, remember that will be giving you a refund on your TP. Those can be useful as a defensive setup, and even when there's, for example, a dispel that might get rid of them, it potentially causes a dispel rather than a direct attack, so hell, that might be beneficial anyway. There's a lot of different ways to use the tools on hand. And yeah, I should probably end this before my nose keeps interrupting me even more, as you can probably hear. All right, yeah, I hope this was a good one. Take care. Hopefully this was helpful, and take care.